Hi, everybody. I'm Aspen Baker. I'm the founder and executive director of Exhale, and I'm also the author of this book, Pro Voice, How to Keep Listening When the World Wants to Fight. And I'm bringing that up because in my book, I got the chance to interview a lot of terrific leaders, and one of my favorite is Eveline Shen. And Eveline Shen has agreed to be with us today to talk with all of you, just, in our ongoing conversation about how to make sense of the election and this time. So Eveline, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, and I encourage your viewers to read the book. It's a great book.
That is super. See, I'm already happy that Eveline is here. I knew I was gonna love it. So Eveline is the executive director of Forward Together, which is a national multiracial organization that is working to promote reproductive justice, and she's been the executive director for about 15 years, maybe a little bit more. If you don't know Forward Together, one of their big initiatives is Strong Families. They have almost like 200 organizations that are members. These organizations represent all different kinds of issues, constituencies, and communities. Your people are people of color, your people are queer people, formerly incarcerated, young moms. I mean, often the folks who are the targets of punitive policies and judgment and stigma. So I just want to know and give you the chance to talk a little bit about how things are going, how people are feeling. Where's your community at right now?
Yeah, totally. So we have had the opportunity to talk to really thousands of people and leaders since the elections. And one of the very palpable things that we're seeing and that I'm really getting is that people are scared, right? They're scared, anxious as we enter this, really unpredictable and potentially volatile time, not only for our country, but for the world. And, I think one of the things, that I'm hearing from people is they don't trust that the new administration is going to kind of lead this country in a way where they're going to stand with communities and support them and give them what they need. And I know for me, as an executive director, as a parent of two teenage daughters, and as a concerned citizen, I feel like this is also, I share a lot of these concerns and fears. And what we're also seeing is across the country this kind of unprecedented wave of folks who are coming together who really see this time as a call to action. Okay. And so over the weekend, just this weekend alone, we saw, tens of thousands of people meeting in, their kitchens, bringing together neighbors and talking about how they can resist what may come. We saw tens of thousands of folks coming out to march against police brutality on Martin Luther King Day, and then to come out and support the day before healthcare access. So, juxtaposing, people are able to move from their fear and their anxiety into action, and I find that really heartening.
Okay. Is that something that you have an organizing role in terms of getting all those people together, over the weekend, or is that something, because you're kind of a convener of all these groups that's coming out of communities, sort of what's your role in all that?
Yeah, I think the role that we're playing is kind of looking over the long term in terms of like what are, so we are really trying to plug in to kind of what can we do in the short term around resisting, but we're also thinking about how do we move proactively. And so we have groups that are in deeply red states, and we have groups that we're working with who are in purple states, and then groups like California that are very blue. And so different strategies, we are using different strategies depending on the political context to try to move and protect our communities.
Yeah. That's such an important point. And I will say one of the things that I talked to you about in my book was how you work across those differences, and you have so many in your own movement, in your own organization, and that's one of them. And, one of the things at Exhale that we ask a lot, especially since the election, which felt like a surprise, for many of us, like what happened, how did that happen? We ask, what are the voices that we're missing You know, what are the stories that we're not hearing? Like, what's happening behind the scenes that is not right in front of us? And so I know you have done a lot of work, your organization's done a lot of work leading up to the election. I'm just wondering if you have any insight to offer that about what we're missing.
Yeah. Well, as you know, through being Pro Voice and the work that Exhale does, you know, stories are a way that we as human beings make sense of the world and make meaning of what's happening around us. And, you know, up through the elections, we got a strong dose of how Trump, the kinds of stories he's telling, right?
Yeah.
About women, about LGBT folks, about immigrant communities, Muslim communities. And we've seen throughout history how people in power use stories about certain vulnerable and marginalized communities to stigmatize them, to dehumanize them, and to really legitimize taking away communities' rights and resources, to legitimize oppression, to legitimize violence. And part of that is also invisibility. And one of the, you know, things that have, communities that have come up really after the elections is the invisibility of folks who are in rural communities. Okay. And so we work with a number of organizations who are in rural states, and we ourselves have staff who live and work in New Mexico. And so before the elections, we decided that we wanted to hear from rural communities. Okay. And a lot of times you, in the media, you know, we get stories about folks in rural communities, but they're never written from their perspective. And so we wanted to go directly to them and hear what are they concerned about. And so we hired a team of canvassers to go out and listen. And I don't know about your experience with canvassers, but I know when canvassers come to my door, they're usually not from my community. Mm-hmm. They come with like a bunch of issues, and they tell me about how they feel about those issues, and then they want me to sign on or to give money, and then I never see them again. And I also, you know, whether I decide to give money or to support them, when I shut the door, I don't really feel like I've done anything to, you know, contribute in any real way. And so we decided to hire people from those communities to be canvassers. And so they went out and they knocked on their neighbors' doors, and they started off with a story. And they started by sharing kind of why they themselves are getting involved in these elections and what's important to them about their community. And then they invited people at the door to share their story about, you know, to tell them why are they interested, you know, what are the things that are most deeply concerning for themselves and their families. And by telling stories, by allowing the people that are most deeply impacted to be the authors of those stories, and by sharing stories, relationships got developed, dialogue started happening, and you know, we listened and we heard directly from folks about how they feel about abortion access, about LGBT issues, about community safety, and people were really ready and wanting to engage. And so I think that that's one of the things that, you know, we're learning is we need to break down those barriers and to listen to folks, and that people want to be involved. And so right now our, you know, staff is getting ready for the state legislative session that's happening in New Mexico. And those folks that we hired who are canvassers, we're bringing those folks, we're bringing the folks they door knocked, and they're going to share their stories to legislators, the people in power who can make those decisions, and directly kind of get their ear and get them to make change that makes sense to them, instead of having middle people. So, you know, and our organizers, I have to say, we're super excited that, you know, New Mexico is a rural state, and we were able to really kind of, New Mexico was able to flip the state house from Republican to Democrat, and the 3 out of the 4 leadership positions in the state house are now women of color, and they're women of color are champions of women, of families, and you know, we're really excited to work with them to continue to make changes for women and families in New Mexico.
It's a pretty inspiring story, and I'm wondering, like, you know, given that level of like listening and engagement that happens, you know, and then to have the election, the national election results and the national political climate be so divisive, you know, how you're what's the encouragement, that you're sort of offering to kind of, keep it on at this time?
Well, I think engaging everyday people, engaging people who are normally not part of the discussions, who are left out.
Yeah.
So many of these people that we went out to reach had never been door knocked or phone banged.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the lessons, is that we
Right.
can't dismiss whole communities of people as if they weren't actually part of this country, and they aren't valuable people that we need to engage to be able to make our democracy work for everyone.
Right. So how do you, for your partners in states that are sort of red or purple, that are experiencing a lot of marginalization around their issues and identities and concerns, like how do you work with them? Is it about staying positive? Is it about hope? Is it about hard work? Is it about anger? Is it about empathy? Like, sort of what's the way that you kind of stay with them?
Yeah. So I think that what's happening is that on the national level, things are going to be really entrenched.
Okay.
And so it really comes down to what's happening at the local and state level.
Okay.
And I think, listening to the organizations that are working in those deeply red states, kind of taking their lead and seeing kind of where they see our moments of, and opportunities to resist, but also to develop informal networks of being able to provide healthcare access when we can't rely on institutions, and bringing back some of the networks that were happening before, Roe v. Wade was passed. And so, I think that there's opportunity to basically figure out how do we not cede any power, not leave anything on the table that we do have, and utilize that to be able to make change. Turn over every stone to figure out kind of how we can resist and also move proactively to protect our communities.
So the future is going to be complicated, chaotic, hard, emotional, and I know that a lot of people out in the Exhale community are trying to figure out like what their role is, and do they stand up and march, do they tweet, do they organize, do they tell their story? I mean, there's not going to be one sort of strategy like you talked about earlier, or one sort of simple solution, but what's the one thing that you want to offer people today?
Yeah.
What's the one thing today, the one next thing that you think?
I think the most important thing that you can do is to stay engaged. And yes, we are all going to have our feelings and our fears, and yes, these are really unprecedented times, but I want folks to know that you are not alone, that there are millions of people who are with you, who care about their families, about their neighbors, who want health care, who want a living wage, who want to live in a community that is, devoid of violence, that want access to reproductive health care, abortion, other forms of health care, that want a future and a better, climate in terms of changing and proactively moving around climate change. So I want people to know that every action that you take, and if we all do our part, then the folks who are in the new administration, who may want to pass policies based on hate and divisiveness, and oppressing other communities, that if all of us do our part, we can beat this, and we can come together, and we can organize, and we can build power, and we can rebuild our democracy brick by brick, so that it's responsive to all of our communities.
Hear, hear. All right. Well, I feel a lot better than when I did when we started this interview. So I want to thank Eveline for joining us today and for sharing a window into what you're seeing and hearing, and really, giving us some inspiration and some long-term strategic thinking, because we need it all. So thank you so much for being here.
And thank you for your leadership in the pro-voice movement. I feel like it's what pro-voice is about allowing people who are directly impacted to tell their story, to talk about the solutions they want. And I really just feel like it's really important. Being pro-voice is really important during these times. So.